Remember when they said it would never be a subscription? They lied. On October 30th, 2025, exactly 19 months after Canva paid $380 million to acquire Affinity, the last professional design suite without a monthly fee quietly disappeared, framed as a gift, called free. Millions of designers had trusted Affinity precisely because it wasn't Adobe. One-time purchase. You owned it. No cloud, no account, no monthly bill creeping up every 18 months. Canva didn't just buy a software company, they bought the trust of every designer who had walked away from Adobe and never looked back. Then they sold it. There's a reason this story follows a pattern you've seen before. And there's one decision, made quietly, framed as generosity, that explains exactly how a company built to destroy Adobe ended up copying Adobe's playbook, almost line for line. If you want to see how a rebellion becomes the empire, hit subscribe. This story gets worse before it gets better. To understand how Affinity failed this badly, you need to go back to 1987. That year, a small British software company called Serif was founded in Nottingham, England. Not Silicon Valley, not San Francisco, Nottingham. Their original mission was straightforward: make professional desktop publishing tools that didn't cost a fortune. While Adobe was building its empire on the backs of agencies and corporations with deep pockets, Serif was selling to the designer who couldn't afford to be Adobe's customer. Serif made decent software: Page Plus, Draw Plus, Photo Plus, tools that worked, tools that were affordable, tools that nobody wrote magazine covers about. Then, on May 6, 2013, Adobe made a decision that changed everything for Serif. At the Adobe Max conference, Adobe announced that Creative Suite was dead. No more perpetual licenses, no more buying software in a box and owning it. From that point forward, if you wanted Photoshop, Illustrator, or InDesign, you paid Adobe every single month. Forever. The full suite. $50 a month. Every month for the rest of your career. You already know how this ends. Designers who had paid $1,200 for a perpetual license and owned it were furious. A Change.org petition went up the same day. Forums exploded, and Serif saw the opening. On October 2, 2014, Affinity Designer launched on Mac. One-time purchase. No subscription. $60. It was fast, it was modern, and it was built specifically for the designer who was done being Adobe's monthly revenue line. By 2015, Affinity Photo followed. By 2019, Affinity Publisher completed the suite. By November 2022, the Universal License Bundle, all 3 apps, every platform, cost $170. Once, total. And for a while, a long while, it worked. Better than anyone expected. Here's how big it actually got. By 2022, Affinity had accumulated millions of paying users across more than 160 countries. Design forums that had spent years as Adobe echo chambers started filling with Affinity converts. YouTube tutorials for Affinity Designer were pulling millions of views. Every time Adobe raised its prices, the comment sections turned into Affinity recruitment drives. What they actually built was something that genuinely threatened Adobe's grip on the mid-market. Not the enterprise, not the Hollywood studio, but the freelancer, the small agency, the independent photographer, the exact customer Adobe had been squeezing for a decade. Affinity Designer had professionals switching their entire workflows, not as a protest, as a preference. At the peak of Affinity's momentum, Ashley Hewson, Serif's CEO, said it plainly. It feels slightly wrong to charge a subscription. We launched it as a one-off cost perpetual license model. That quote circulated everywhere. It was the thing designers had been waiting to hear from someone who actually built the software. In November 2022, Affinity V2 launched. The Universal License, all 3 apps, every platform, was $170. During the launch discount, it dropped to $99. $99. One time. For everything. Adobe's equivalent at that same moment was $600 a year. Every year. Forever. $99 versus $600 a year. That's not a typo. There was a number Canva's board had been watching, one that Serif's CEO never talked about publicly. It wasn't the user count. It wasn't the app ratings. It was the number of Adobe customers who had searched for an alternative and landed on Affinity's website. By 2023, that number was in the tens of millions annually. Canva saw it, Adobe saw it, and one of them decided to do something about it. Subscribe if you want the story they didn't put in the press release. New video every week. Here's the decision that changed everything. And once you hear it, you'll understand why millions of designers walked away and never came back. On March 26, 2024, Canva announced it had acquired Serif. What they told you: Affinity would remain independent, perpetual licenses would continue, pricing would stay fair. Canva's co-founder and CEO, Melanie Perkins, said the acquisition would allow Affinity to reach more people than ever before. Ashley Hewson called it an exciting new chapter. What they actually did, handed the keys of the only credible Adobe alternative to a company whose entire business model is built on subscriptions, upsells, and cloud dependency. Within hours of the announcement, forums and social media filled with a single question: how long before Affinity becomes a subscription? Canva's public pledges were noted. They were also not believed. Designers who had lived through Adobe's 2013 pivot recognized the language. They had heard "nothing will change" before. One designer on Hacker News wrote what thousands were thinking: this is exactly how it starts. They buy the thing you love, they promise to protect it, and then 18 months later you're paying monthly. Sound familiar? Canva's attempt to reassure the Affinity community became the single greatest advertisement Krita and Inkscape ever received. Imagine David, a freelance brand designer in Berlin. March 27, 2024. He opens his laptop, reads the acquisition announcement, and immediately backs up every Affinity file he owns. Not because anything has changed yet, because he knows how this ends. He paid for Adobe CS5 in 2010. He paid for CS6 in 2012. Then Adobe told him he didn't own software anymore. He switched to Affinity in 2015. He is not switching again. David was not alone. The Affinity community forums saw a surge in threads titled, "What's the alternative to Affinity now?" Posted the same week, Canva promised nothing would change. Here's what nobody was saying out loud. Canva's own business model, the one that had made it worth $26 billion by 2023, was built entirely on a free-to-paid subscription funnel. Free tier, paid tier, monthly billing. That was the product, that was the company. And now that company owned Affinity, Canva had never, in its entire history, acquired a product and left its monetization model alone. Not once. The question wasn't whether Affinity would change. The question was how long Canva would wait before changing it. The answer was 19 months. That was the mistake. What happened next was the punishment. The numbers are worse than you think. The numbers don't lie. On October 30th, 2025, Canva relaunched Affinity. The three separate apps, Designer, Photo, Publisher, were merged into a single application simply called Affinity, free to download. Here's what that actually meant. First, to download and use Affinity, you now needed a Canva account, not an Affinity account, a Canva account. The same platform built for people who use drag-and-drop templates. Required, mandatory, no exceptions. Second, the perpetual license model. The entire reason millions of professionals chose Affinity over Adobe was gone, not deprecated, gone. There was no Affinity fee 3 to buy. Third, the AI tools, generative fill, background removal, super resolution, locked behind a Canva Pro subscription, $15 a month, every month. Fourth, existing V2 license holders kept access to their V2 apps, but V2 would receive no new features. The only path forward was the free app tied to a Canva account, with a subscription waiting at the end of the funnel. Fifth, the company that had built its entire identity on pay once, own it forever, had in a single product launch eliminated the ability to pay once and own anything. $120 a year for Canva Pro. Adobe's full Creative Cloud, every app they make, costs $840 a year. The gap still exists, but the principle is now identical. You pay Canva monthly for the tools you need. You pay Adobe monthly for the tools you need. The only difference is the logo. That's what 10 years of "We'll never be Adobe" was worth. A different logo. Adobe did not need to respond. Adobe did not need to lower prices, improve its product, or acknowledge Affinity at all. Canva had neutralized the only serious pricing threat Adobe faced in the professional mid-market, and done it for free. The Affinity community forums, which had spent years as a gathering place for designers who were done with Adobe, filled with a single recurring post: I'm going back to Adobe. Not because Adobe had gotten better, because the reason to stay had been removed. Imagine James, a freelance photographer in Austin. He had used Affinity Photo since 2016. He had recommended it to every photographer he knew. He had built his entire editing workflow around it. On October 30th, 2025, he opened his laptop, saw the update notification, read the release notes, and spent 45 minutes creating a Canva account he never wanted for software he had already paid for. He canceled the Canva Pro trial the same day. He resubscribed to Adobe Lightroom the following week. Millions of users like James made the same calculation. The tool they trusted had been absorbed by the system it was built to replace. They were counting on you not noticing. Millions noticed. This isn't over. By the end of 2025, Canva had embedded Affinity into its ecosystem at every level. The free core app is a funnel. The Canva account requirement is a data collection mechanism. The AI tools locked behind Canva Pro are the monetization layer. It's the same move, run by a different company with a friendlier logo. They just did it faster than Adobe did. Watch for these 3 things. First, feature removal from the free tier. If you see core professional tools that existed in V2, quietly moved behind the Canva Pro paywall, it means the free tier is being hollowed out. That is not a technical decision. That is a pricing decision. You've seen it before. Second, V2 end-of-life announcements. If you see Canva announce that V2 apps will stop receiving security updates or OS compatibility patches, it means the migration to the subscription funnel is being forced, not offered. Watch the language carefully. We're focusing resources on the new Affinity, means V2 is being killed. Third, Canva account data integration. If you see your Affinity usage data, your files, your projects, your design history, appearing inside Canva's platform, or being used to target you with Canva Pro upsells, it means the account requirement was never about convenience. It was about data. The one thing you can do right now: keep your V2 installer, back it up, store it somewhere you control. The window to own professional creative software without a subscription closed in 2025. Nobody announced it, it just closed. If you already did that the day the Canva acquisition was announced, you were right. They were counting on you not noticing. Millions of designers noticed. Drop a comment. Are you staying with Affinity, going back to Adobe, or is there a third option nobody's talking about?